His work crosses a lot of different borders, and it helps, of course, that he's not only a consummate storyteller, and we've been hearing a lot about story today, but a photographer and a programmer and coder himself. I find that incredibly impressive. He's a digital native, obviously, but I think what makes his work so extraordinarily unique is that it's always reflecting on how the proliferation of online culture alters the relationship between ourselves, technology, and the world around us. He has a lovely quote that I just want to read to you about coding in an interview that's online called The Great Discontent. And I'll just read a little bit of that to you. So this is Jonathan. "The medium of code has felt like the most appropriate medium to express the times in which we live. It communicates the speed, complexity, and interconnectedness of everything around us. But it also expresses the beautiful patterns that can emerge from that chaos. Code is an elegant way of approaching all of that, which I think is more difficult to approach through older mediums like oil painting or sculpture." And of course, at the end of the article, he does add he has a love-hate relationship with code, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. So let me just mention a couple of the projects, and if you don't know them, you can go home after and explore them at your leisure. In 2006, he released We Feel Fine, described as an exploration of human emotion in 6 movements. What the site does, and he's assured me he's going to be showing some of the, I guess, the landing pages for these, so you'll get a bit of a visual sense from him later. But what that site does is it aggregates online expressions of emotions through a search engine that cycles through millions of blogs, scraping statements that begin with "I feel" or "I'm feeling," and there are apparently close to 25 million examples so far. There are different interfaces, metrics, and movements where the statements or photographs attached to them can be organized. And to me, there's just a lovely paradox in this work with its alleged attempt to quantify emotion, where you can organize each data bit by gender, geography, or even by the weather, or group certain emotions together. But what you keep coming up with is both the commonality of the expressions and their particularity. Whale Hunt, a project I just found so astonishing, produced in 2007. And for that project, Jonathan set out to aggregate data in the real world through a 9-day whale hunt in Barrow, Alaska, that he documented through over 3,000 photographs. And it's just an extraordinary sight. The frequency of the photographic record starts out with mathematical precision. A photograph is taken every 5 minutes. Even when Jonathan is asleep, a timer continues to take the photographs. But the frequency increases with the acceleration of his heartbeat. So there's this lovely kind of element of embodiedness in the project during the most exciting bits when a whale is targeted and killed. And you can see, hopefully Jonathan will show us some of the beautiful interfaces that you can use to access these photographs. In 2010, he launched I Love Your Work, about the everyday lives of lesbian sex workers in New York while they produce a porn series. And it's a fantastically interesting. I think what I love most about that project is, I mean, we know porn is a big drawer of traffic on the web, but actually what he does is he undermines that sense of titillation, because you're following workers, and I think you were taking 5 minutes every, I can't remember what a logarithm was to that. But basically, if you go on the site, what you're looking at is people brushing their teeth and going to work and driving in their car and doing all the banal things we do every day. And maybe, many minutes down the line, you'll actually get a little flash of the titillating bits. The final project I'll mention is Cowbird, which was named as one of the best websites of 2012 by Time magazine. Cowbird's a storytelling platform, a really wonderful one, that allows other people to post stories, photos, and videos, and which has been described as part of the slow web, a place to enjoy the intimacy the web offers as a place for reflection and human connection, as opposed to the superficial velocity of most online traffic. So I think that might give you a little bit of a hint of some of the previous work that Jonathan has been known for. He's been honored with multiple awards and distinctions, including an IDFA award for digital storytelling, 3 Webby awards. His work has been exhibited at multiple festivals and institutions around the world, including MoMA, the Pompidou Center, the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing, the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, etc., etc. And it's with tremendous pleasure that I introduce you to Jonathan, who'll be speaking about his new work, The Network Effect.
Thank you, Brenda. That was such a gracious and wide-ranging introduction. It was really nice. Thank you. Are you gonna? Can you sit here next to me while we do the talk?
Of course.
Okay. Well, it's really nice to be here with you all. I actually just moved. I've been living in Brooklyn, New York for years, and I just moved about 2 weeks ago to back home, actually, to Vermont, which I'm loving. And this roof in here reminds me a lot of the barns that we have there, so I feel very at home here in this wooden environment. And the taxi driver told me that the name of this place, Beit Zaytun, means the house of guavas in Arabic, I think. Is that right? Olives. Oh, interesting. He went on this whole riff about how delicious zaytuns were, and they were this fruit I had to try that he didn't know the English word for. And we narrowed it down to guava, but I guess he was wrong. Just goes to show you can't trust anyone. Okay. So what I'd like to do is, let me just get this going. I think it might be helpful if we could turn those lights off so that people can see that. That's great, actually, if that's all right for everybody. So what I'd like to do is talk to you primarily about a recent project called Network Effect and tell you the backstory of how that project evolved and came to be. But I want to kind of bookend that by talking about some work that preceded that, and then also some more kind of recent thinking since that one. So it'll be kind of a long story with work and images along the way, and hopefully it'll be interesting and useful. So I've been making art in different forms my whole life, and I dug up this old photo that I took a few years ago of drawings that I made many years ago. I made these when I was 10 years old, and these were portraits of different stuffed animals that I had. Though the bunny is mysteriously missing, though. I couldn't find the bunny stuffed animal, so he apparently was a casualty of aging or something. But I started out doing just a lot of drawing like any kid would, and I was very into comic books as a little kid. And in high school, I had a painting teacher, and I started making oil paintings, landscapes where I would set up a little easel and wear a little beret and go out and stand in the rain and make pictures. And it's kind of my most romantic phase. And then shortly thereafter, I started keeping these handmade sketchbooks after seeing a show in New York City as a teenager of a photographer called Peter Beard, who did a lot of work in Africa in the mid-20th century and lived a very kind of wild, adventurous life out there. And I was inspired by his sketchbooks, many of which were made in his own blood. And I started keeping some of my own, not in my own blood, but with watercolors and plants and dead insects and ticket stubs. And I kept these for a few years, and they were these constant companions as I traveled around and studied abroad and went here and there. And I would try to write about my experiences and add a new page more or less each day. And they were a great friend to me during this time, and they were, I think, a really great instrument of personal growth. Some of them were quite personal. Others had photographs. And I kept these for a number of years, and then I stopped very abruptly in 2003 on a trip to Central America with some friends where I was alone one afternoon walking down the street, actually in San Jose, Costa Rica, and got robbed at gunpoint by five people who grabbed me and put a gun on my head and beat me up pretty badly and cut the strap of the bag that I was carrying, which contained a sketchbook with about 8 or 9 months of work in it, and along with some other things that were also stolen. I think the loss of this book, I don't know, I took it to be like a sign to find another direction. At various moments in my life, I've had turning points like that I've taken to be signs to leave the path that I'm on and take a different one. And at this particular moment, I had just graduated from college where I had studied computer science, but hadn't yet found a way to use computer science in an art-making practice. So I was really feeling split as a creator. On the one hand, making these very kind of traditional tactile art objects, and on the other hand, having this new skill set of computer programming, which I didn't know how to apply yet. And I think I took this robbery as an indication that I should stop making objects that can be stolen, and instead try to work with code in some way. And that was a very awkward process at first because I never thought of code as a creative medium initially. But I challenged myself to try to do that, and so around that time of the robbery, my work took a really dramatic turn, and I started making these very kind of clean, cold, and crisp data, and people would find these interesting sequences of words that appeared together, and they would think that there was a conspiracy because if you search for the word America, it's followed by ensure oil opportunity. And if you search for Microsoft, it's followed by acquire salary tremendous. And there were a number of other ones that people would find, and these were just coincidences of the data, but people were convinced that there was some meaning there. And I think that was an early lesson to me that the human mind loves to find meaning in chaos. And whatever you give a human mind to play with, it will find a way to anthropomorphize it and make it meaningful. And I feel like in a way, this is what we are, is we're like meaning-making organisms. And so I kind of got a weird glimpse at that truth through this data project. After word count, I wanted to make data projects that used real-time data, that kind of sucked in information from the internet in real time and composed it into these meticulous environments. This was 10 by 10, which every hour automatically selects the top 100 words and pictures in the world based on international news coverage and creates these photo mosaics. And these photos and mosaics are created every hour and saved, so you can browse anything, any hour going back to 2004, a few days after George W. Bush was elected. So it's kind of this interesting window into history of planet Earth every hour. I think this project, We Feel Fine, that Brenda alluded to, was something of a breakthrough for me because it was the first time that I was able to use data in a way that actually felt very poetic and very human and didn't just feel like a kind of cold, rational depiction of a database, but actually felt like it was this kind of living, breathing humanity. So We Feel Fine was made with a friend of mine, Seb Kamvar, who teaches at MIT now, and we were interested in taking the vast quantity of self-expression that was suddenly pouring onto the internet, mainly on blogs back in these days. This is before Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all that. And showing how much beauty there was hiding there in that self-expression. And you have to remember, back in 2006, the internet was not yet a mainstream thing, and it was still really thought to be this kind of cold and human, geeky place. Where like programmers and nerds hung out. But we saw it as actually this new stomping ground of humanity where all of these people were confessing the intimate details of their lives in these like anonymous blogs. And we were interested in showing how beautiful that landscape was. And so I'm going to just show you, I'm going to go a little bit more deeply into this project just because I think it represents a phase of my life that I was in that I want to talk about. So this was We Feel Fine. We made a system that basically scans all of the new blog posts coming onto the internet every 2 minutes, searching for any sentence that contains the words I feel or I am feeling. So it basically identifies people as they're talking about their emotions. And then it automatically identifies demographic traits about each person. So their age, their gender, their geographic location, and the weather conditions in that location when they wrote that sentence. And we find this all in an automated way. And the system has been running since 2005, gathering around 20,000 new feelings per day. And then we built this interactive environment where the feelings can be browsed. And so I want to point out a few things here. It's a little hard to see with the light on the screen, but it's okay. So you can see that some of the dots, each dot represents a sentence. The larger ones are longer sentences. The smaller ones are shorter sentences. The brighter dots are happier feelings. The darker dots are more negative feelings. Any of these dots can be clicked, so I feel like I'm blogging for no one. I feel your breath against me, I sigh and lean into you, press against you, wow, your hand moves under my skirt, tickling my thighs, surprising me with your touches. Occasionally you'll bite or punch or slap, so I can never anticipate what your next movement will be. I think I'll look fine and dressy without feeling like some jerk in a narrow shirt and bad dress pants. So these are just endless and constantly coming in. And you see that some of the dots here are clustering around the mouse cursor, showing signs of curiosity. Likewise, if I move away, they lose interest and they go back to their wandering. If I hold down the mouse and move around, they show fear, and they're running away from me now. And so these were just like a few very subtle design flourishes that we put in to try to humanize these abstract dots. Somebody talked this morning about Hans Rosling's project with the dots showing differences in child mortality. In a similar way, like the human mind is so good at finding humanity in things that are not human, and so you just need the slightest bit of a nudge, and then people will suddenly see these things as very human and expressive. So there's a number of different movements in this piece. This one is called Madness, where the dots just swarm around. There's also Murmurs, where they all go up to the ceiling and then one by one come down as typewritten sentences. I feel that this could easily lead into harsh situations. I feel that Nicholson played the Joker better. I feel like this dorky girl next door. I feel like put 100% in. I feel as if I made the best no-fat added dressing I've ever had. So they just go on and on and on. Some of them also contain photographs, so if a person posts a blog entry that contains an I feel sentence and also contains an image, we automatically create these photo overlays. So I've never experienced before, and it made me feel quite uneasy, but obviously I made it home in one piece and I didn't have to check my bag this time. I feel like when you're waiting, you become trapped in a moment of nothingness. I mean, some of them are very poetic. I Feel You in My Heart by Bechita Locke. I feel truly blessed to have them in my life. So as the movements progress, they get more and more abstract. Mob starts to classify the feelings into different groups. So this is showing the most common feelings overall in the last few hours. The gender breakdown shows women being slightly more emotive than men. The age breakdown shows mainly people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. Normally there's more teens. The weather breakdown, again, sorry, it's hard to see here, but there's sunny ones swirling around, cloudy ones floating along, raindrops falling down, and you can click any of these. And location is very hard to see, but it's a world map with all the feelings showing where they originate. Metrics gets even more abstract, and this is showing basically like a stock market of feelings, so you can see the world feeling bored at 4.2 times the usual level, lucky at 2.8 times the usual level, and so on. And then finally, mounds shows the feelings as these large jelly blobs organized by their commonality. So better is the most common feeling, bad, good, and when I hold the mouse, they dance a little bit. And then you can go down this list, and there's about 6,000 adjectives that are tracked by this project, and they get more and more obscure as you go down the blobs here, so you can see the people feeling consistent, or painless, or chubby, or indulgent, or chaotic, or flawed. And then there's a search interface if you want to get really specific, so you can find women feeling materialistic in their 30s when it's raining in a certain country going back more than a decade now. This is online at wefeelfine.org, and as I said, this project was really a breakthrough for us, I think, and I think it made a big impact on the field that we're all working in, because I really think it was one of the first things that showed the poetic potential of data, and this was before the social web was a thing, and now, of course, this is the reality that we all live in. I mean, we're glued to Facebook, we're glued to Twitter, we're glued to Instagram, we're glued to perceiving each other's humanity through the data trails that we leave behind publicly. I mean, this has become totally a part of our reality now, but it was quite new back a decade ago. So I want to just go a little more into We Feel Fine and show you some of my favorite montage images. These are the automatic combinations of text and photos made from what we find on blogs. I feel like I'm diagonally parked in a parallel universe. I feel so much of my dad alive in me that there isn't even room for me. I feel like Andrew has abandoned me. I understand how it feels to be rejected. I just want to feel alive for the first time in my life. I feel so happy. Man, this had better last. I can feel my cancer grow. I cried in my pillow that night for hours, feeling angry, disappointed, and frustrated, knowing I would never get to see my father again. I feel loved. I feel free. I feel pretty. I need to be in some backwoods redneck town so that I can feel beautiful. I feel skinny, but I'm not. I wouldn't hide it if society didn't make me feel like I needed to. I'm 23 and a recovering meth and heroin addict, and I feel absolutely blessed to still be alive. I feel like I'm in the center of that light circle. I can't wait to see them racing for the first time at Daytona next month because I feel the need for speed. I feel sassy. I feel so naughty. I feel these weirdos are actually an asset to college life. I love how I feel today. So when we made this, Sepp and I were really interested in doing a deeper dive scientifically into the data set that we had collected. And the website that I showed you is actually only capable of showing around 2,000 data points at a time because of the limitations of the browser. So we thought it would be interesting to do a book where we could do some deeper dives statistically that would take hours to run over our whole database. And so in 2009, we did a book with Simon & Schuster called We Feel Fine, an Almanac of Human Emotion. And I'm going to show you some of the infographics that we included in the book that speak to these kind of deeper scientific findings, more in line with the kind of typical academic studies of emotions through sociology and psychology programs at universities. So this one here is showing the top 500 feelings over a 3-year period of time. Each line is a feeling. So the orange one on top is better, which I mentioned is always the #1 feeling in English language blogs. And then you see really how those dominate over all the rest, which are way down below. Except the blue line, which is declining, is the feeling bad. And then there's a faint yellow line that's kind of changing places with the blue line, which is good. And we saw this at first and we thought, oh, this is really interesting. The bloggers have been getting less bad and more good over 3 years. Like, wow, they're kind of getting happier, it seems. But actually, we looked a little closer and we saw that what was actually going on is that the bloggers were getting older over those 3 years. And that one of the strongest emotional trends is a steady rise in feelings of happiness and contentedness throughout our lives up until around the mid-50s, and then there's a plateauing that happens. But the blogging population basically got about 2 years older during that time, and this is what accounts for that shift in those two emotions. This one is showing the top feelings in different demographic groups. So you see better coming in #1 across the board. For the other ones, anytime there's a steeply sloping line from one group to the next, that means that there was a big shift in that feeling from that age group to the next. On the left here, this is feelings connected to their reasons, basically emotional catalysts that cause us to feel different ways. And on the right is a network graph based on word co-occurrence. So this is when, basically whenever we have a sentence where two feelings co-occur, we make a tick mark in our database. And aggregating that across a huge set of data, we can start to deduce these emotional correlations, like these two feelings often co-appear. And through that technique, we were able to create this network graph, which basically shows how you go from feeling one thing to feeling something else. And what's interesting here is that the top left stuff is basically positive feelings, and the bottom right area, which is darker, is basically negative feelings. And you see there's three bridges connecting the positive zone with the negative zone. So the first bridge on the top right is happy connecting the sad, which is not that interesting. I think that's just, we use those two words together a lot in language. But the other two are more interesting. The next one is proud, connecting with ashamed, and beautiful, connecting with ugly. So we found that the words feeling proud and feeling beautiful are actually these very dangerous emotions because it's very easy to slip into negativity. Like feeling proud very often leads to feeling ashamed, and feeling beautiful very often leads to feeling ugly. So we thought that was interesting, those correlations. We call this shades of emotion. It's basically showing how people can go from feeling so positive to so negative. So the bottom left in red is, I like him, that's why I feel so thrilled. And the inside dark blue on the right is, I was feeling suicidal and started cutting. And so these are all actual sentences showing the gradient landscape of emotions. These are moods over the course of a typical lifetime. Moods we classify as groups of similar feelings, so a bunch of adjectives together will constitute a mood. So in joy there, you can see the rise in contentedness that I was talking about up until the mid-50s, and then there's a plateauing. Some of these other strong feelings like anger and disgust and sadness are very strong during adolescence, and then they get lower very, very quickly once you enter your 20s. In this one, we tried to summarize a typical lifetime in one sentence based on the feelings that you're most likely to feel at different ages. We called this a life sentence. So we start simple, but soon fill up with angst and feelings of confinement until we leave those behind to go conquer the world, before gradually trading ambition for balance, developing appreciation for our bodies and our children, and evolving a sense of connectedness, for which we feel grateful, then happy, calm, and finally blessed. And on the right is the underlying data that led to each of those claims. This one is showing how time at different scales tends to affect people's feelings. So the second row is holidays. On the left is Valentine's Day, which shows really strong spikes in feeling loved and feeling special, but lonely is by far the biggest spike on Valentine's Day. It starts to rise about 5 days before Valentine's Day, and it remains high for about a week or two after. The third row is typical weeks. So on the left is stress, and on the right is loneliness. The second column, third row, is loneliness, and you can see that these are the feelings: alone, lonely, and empty. They start quite low on a Monday, remain low through about Wednesday, and then once the week starts to reach Thursday, they start rising, and then the loneliest time of all is Sunday night, right before people go back to work on Monday. The bottom row is a typical day, so on the bottom left is joy, starting very high in the morning, peaking just before lunch, and then starting to plummet once you eat lunch, and bottoming out before you go to sleep. And sadness, the inverse of that, is also true. Sadness is very low all morning and then starts rising after lunch. These are state-by-state comparisons in the US. On the left is where the feelings come from, basically a population graph. And on the right are a bunch of state-by-state comparisons. A few interesting things in the second row on the left, the purple one, that's people who feel a lot of things about God. You can see the Bible Belt in the American South. And the green one to the right of that is people who feel sick a lot. You can see the cold northern states, plus Nevada and Florida, where a lot of old people live, are places that feel sick a lot. And then the bottom row on the left, people who talk about feeling fat, and on the bottom row right is people who actually are fat. It's a obesity graph, and that they're also inversely related, which is interesting. So the states that often talk about feeling fat have some of the lowest obesity levels: California, New York, New Jersey, and then some of the states with higher obesity levels in the South rarely ever talk about actually feeling that way. So I thought that was interesting also. Anyway, so we feel fine. It was a great experience making this project with SEP, and we got a lot of acclaim for it, and it felt very energized to kind of continue this modality of looking at reality through data. And around this time, we were commissioned by the Museum of Modern Art in New York to do a similar piece around online dating. And so we made a project called I Want You to Want Me for the MoMA, which, in a similar vein to We Feel Fine, took millions of online dating profiles from publicly available dating sites and created this kind of interactive 5-foot-tall touchscreen where you could navigate through the profiles, which were personified as balloons. It was interesting. After doing this project, I actually, I worked incredibly hard for about 3 months to finish this project for the MoMA, and then we had the big opening, and I think I felt maybe like it was going to change my life or be this this wonderful doorway that would lead into something else, and it just it was kind of like the opening happened, and then the big party happened, and then it was over, and it was like back to normal life. And I actually entered like a real period of depression after this project that was really hard to make sense of, and I think I was just burned out from spending so much time staring at screens and using the internet as a means of learning about life. Had started to feel really limited and limiting, and I just didn't really have much enthusiasm to keep doing another one of these data visualization projects. And so there was a period of months where I wasn't really working on anything. I went down to Texas and drove out to West Texas and went to the Mexican border. I remember walking across the Rio Grande into this small Mexican village and like lying on the ground, and there was this like doll head that someone had impaled on a fence post, which seemed somehow like representative of how I was feeling at that time. But gradually, like traveling around out there, like having coffees in diners in the morning and sleeping out in the desert, like I started to feel energized again and inspired again, but in a different way. I didn't really want to go back to making these like data visualization aggregation projects. And so that led to so this was another one of these turning points, looking at other people's lives by documenting them myself. And it was kind of like doing a lot of traveling around with a camera. That was kind of the feeling of this phase. But the subjects were always people that weren't me. There was a voyeuristic quality to all of these projects, the whale hunting, the Bhutan, and this one. And I think that voyeuristic quality started to also feel limiting to me, and I started to feel like I was hunting for material in other people's lives, and there was a quality certainly of like illuminating these people's realities so that other people could understand them more, but there was also a quality of using them in some way. And I thought it would be interesting to flip the camera onto myself and start using my own life more as the material. And so when I turned 30, I started a daily practice of taking a photo and writing a story every day, and posting them online before going to sleep each night. And I did that religiously for 440 days, and I called it Today. And this was by far the most personal work that I've ever made, and it got to the point where it was impossible to separate this project from my life. They were synonymous. My life was this project, and the project was my life. And that at first was a really interesting way of living because I found that it heightened my awareness for what was happening around me, and at the same time it introduced this strange element of not knowing what was life and what was performance. And also this element of being watched, because people could sign on to the internet any night and just see what my emotional comportment was that day. If I was going through a breakup, if I had just seen this. And that became very intrusive as it was thousands of people watching this. And it became really burdensome ultimately, and I ended up stopping it really abruptly 440 days in. And I remember feeling a huge emptiness and void in my life once I stopped it, because it had become like a great friend, and then it was gone. And it was a strange freedom and liberation to be without it, but also I felt this void. But having done that project, and while I was doing this project, I became very inspired to create a tool by which other people could do a similar thing for themselves in their own lives. And that led to Cowbird, which was basically a storytelling ecosystem where anybody could share intimate stories of their personal lives for other people to experience. And I think I was really hopeful that Cowbird would be this like world-changing creation that would kind of replace Facebook as the means through which we all communicate our impressions of our lives in this kind of deeper, more introspective, more self-reflective, more generous way than the kind of interpersonal capitalism that seems to prevail on most social media sites. And so Cowbird had a very different vibe. It almost had a reverential kind of chapel, sacred-like vibe to it. No ads, at first no comments, nothing like that. It was just a very quiet place for witnessing other people's lives. And I spent about 3 years of my life, two years coding it, and then about a year trying to make this into a thing. And it just never really got off the ground. It never really worked. I think it was the first thing I've worked on that I consider somewhat of a failure. It really took the wind out of my sails in a similar way to how that robbery had many years before. And I think it caused me to question whether I wanted to continue. You guys okay?
Sorry,
No
it's
worries.
making the speakers pause.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that, everyone.
No worries. And so with Cowbird, I had all of these hopes that it would be this big thing, and then it kind of never was that. And so that was a really hard thing to adjust to. And after Cowbird, I entered another phase of feeling very lost and very stuck that lasted about a year and a half, where I wasn't making any new work. I was reading a lot about Eastern philosophy and psychedelics and kind of studying the nature of mind and how it related to reality and stuff like this, but I had no clue of how to map any of this to a project. So it was a very kind of errant, wandering time for me. That lasted for about a year and a half. I wrote about it. I wrote an essay called Navigating Stuckness during this time, kind of about these challenges. And towards the end of it, I reconnected with an old friend named Greg Hochmuth, who's on the right here, and we decided to kind of get back in the saddle and try to make another kind of data project together. I figured maybe going back to that phase would be a path out of the stuck feeling. And so Greg had been one of the first engineers at Instagram and then went with them to Facebook and had worked at Google prior to that. So he had a lot of experience on the inside of large Silicon Valley companies. And we shared an interest in using data to create these kind of beautiful poetic portraits, which felt like an earlier phase of my life, but I was interested in going back to it with Greg's help. And around this time, I had been living in my apartment in Brooklyn with this poem up on the wall that an ex-girlfriend of mine had given me. It was a poem called What the Living Do by this poet Marie Howe. And she had written this poem to commemorate her brother who had died of AIDS a few years before. And she wrote this really beautiful poem to him, kind of about the sacred qualities of everyday life. And I'll read you the poem because I think it's really beautiful. It's called What the Living Do. Johnny, the kitchen sink has been clogged for days. Some utensil probably fell down there. And the Drano won't work but smells dangerous, and the crusty dishes have piled up, waiting for the plumber I still haven't called. This is the everyday we spoke of. It's winter again. The sky's a deep, headstrong blue, and the sunlight pours through the open living room windows because the heat's on too high in here and I can't turn it off. For weeks now, driving or dropping a bag of groceries in the street, the bag breaking, I've been thinking, this is what the living do. And yesterday, hurrying along those wobbly bricks in the Cambridge sidewalk, spilling my coffee down my wrist and sleeve, I thought it again. And again later when buying a hairbrush. This is it. Parking. Slamming the car door shut in the cold. What you called that yearning. What you finally gave up. We want the spring to come and the winter to pass. We want whoever to call or not call, a letter, a kiss. We want more and more and then more of it. But there are moments, walking, when I catch a glimpse of myself in the window glass, say, the window of the corner video store, and I'm gripped by a cherishing so deep for my own blowing hair, chapped face, and unbuttoned coat that I'm speechless. I am living. I remember you. So I've always loved this and just find it really beautiful. And I think what Greg and I were really struck by this poem in particular is how in such a simple format, just words, it seems capable of touching places within us that I don't think I've ever seen an interactive project touch. And why is that? What is it about the interactive medium that seems to make it so tricky to touch these deeper places? And we were really interested in that question, and we were really interested in trying to create something that would have a similar emotional feeling as this. Specifically, we're interested in this question of what the living do. Like, what do we actually do? You know, it's the way that this poem elevates the banal moments of everyday life into something beautiful and sacred. Is there some way that we can help people share in that perspective? And so we started talking, and we said, well, how can the internet help communicate this kind of perspective? And the place that we went to first was this notion of simultaneity, the notion that each of us is in a body. I mean, it's a very strange thing. We have these human bodies, and they're kind of like spacesuits that allow us to be here and walk around and breathe the air and eat food and make babies. But they're actually these mysterious things that we don't totally understand. We don't totally understand how they come to life. If any of you have ever seen a dead body and looked into the eye of the person, you will see that the body is this vehicle, but it's not the living thing. There's something that animates the body and brings it to life, and that thing will always be a mystery, I think. But we have these bodies, and these bodies actually have a lot in common. There's a lot of stuff that we all do, that all bodies do. We blink, we breathe, we drink things occasionally, we kick things, we sleep, we fall, we run, we eat. There's all of these actions that bodies do, whether they're human bodies or animal bodies. And we thought, well, maybe this is an approach, maybe this is a pathway, maybe we can use depictions of human bodies engaging in these universal activities from the internet to help people understand the way in which we're all just bodies and how we have this in common. And so we set about to do this by creating this data collection system using Mechanical Turk, which is a service some of you guys might know. It's a service provided by Amazon.com where you can basically set up small, simple activities for anonymous workers around the world to perform for you and pay them very small amounts of money to do those activities. So you might say, like, look at this photo and tell me if it contains an elephant, and I'll pay you 2 cents. That would be a Mechanical Turk activity. So we set up a system where we hired a large number of anonymous workers around the world to find us examples from YouTube videos of human bodies performing 100 different bodily actions. So this is the interface we built that people would use, and they would click on a video, and then they would isolate the period of time within the video where the activity, swimming in this case, occurs. So you can kind of like move along here, and when you found it, you mark it, and then you find the 2-second window and you submit it. So this was the kind of data collection interface that we created. And through that, we had all these videos suddenly streaming in that people were sending us. These are videos of bodies swimming, all these bodies kissing, another thing we sometimes do. All of these bodies puking, another thing we sometimes do. All of these bodies nodding, that's another thing. Yes. Nodding to sleep. It's very strange if you think about it. Like, there are these things that all of us are doing all the time. Yawning. You might get really tired. Yawning. I'm so tired, so sleepy. And so there were 100 of these activities, and we gathered 100 examples of each of these in this fashion. So we had 10,000 videos showing humans engaged in these different activities. And so suddenly we had this big data set of 10,000 2-second video clips gathered anonymously from YouTube in this automated fashion that felt kind of magical. And then we said, okay, well, what are we going to do with these now? How can we make something really beautiful with this material, kind of like that poem? And so we were looking around for a metaphor, like how could we bring this data to life? What would be the right way that would be true to the data? So we started out, and one of the first ones we came up with is like, well, maybe it's like a global organism. Maybe like the same way that there's all these cells in our bodies, they kind of moving around in there, and they have their own reality. Some of them are fighting cancer, some of them are doing this, some of them are doing that. They don't really know that they're part of a body, but they are part of a body. We can see that. Like, maybe that's kind of how we are too. We're all, we each have our individual life. We're running around getting groceries, like going on dates, but we're also part of this human species and this earth, this whole planet. And maybe each of us is kind of like a cell in that organism of the human species. So we said maybe we can use that as a metaphor. So we built this interface that was kind of this cellular, organic, blobby thing. And it was, just like a little sketch, and kind of got to this phase, and it was nice, and it felt really clean and lovely and organic, but it just didn't feel right. Like the quality of those videos that were coming in had a kind of brutal, pixelated ugliness to them that didn't really feel true to a design like this. So we said that's not quite right. Said what else? Well, maybe we're we're living in this interesting age now where science has become kind of like the new religion, like data has become the new religion, and a lot of us in the West are atheists or not religious, and what is lost in that process? Like science doesn't actually tell us how we should live. It doesn't tell us about morality or ethics. So, but maybe we're finding those kinds of guidance in other places now, like through self-help books or through our Facebook news feed showing us how our friends are living. So maybe there's this idea of a secular gospel, how the internet has become like a new sacred text that we're all looking to for guidance on how we should live. So maybe we should do this kind of stained glass thing where we like pixelate the videos and have them in this like leaded grid, kind of like a church stained glass window. So that was another approach we tried, and again, it just didn't quite feel right. So we kept searching. We said, well, maybe it's like a clock, because it's interesting, like a human body, like it turns out that all bodies, regardless of the species, live about the same number of heartbeats. I think it's about 2.5 billion heartbeats, and then the body will die. And if you're a little organism like a shrew and your heart's like, you live very short. And if you're a big organism like a turtle or a whale, it's like, and you live much longer. And the human's kind of in the middle, but the heart is kind of like this clock that's counting out our days, counting out our time alive, and then it's going to expire and we're going to be dead. So maybe we do this thing with the clock. It's kind of like a life clock. So then we built this other interface that's kind of like this heart-beating clock. It's like a grid where it's heart beating, and then it's kind of like a mirage. All the different videos are like blurring into each other, and it's very impressionistic and very kind of strange and surreal. But again, it just didn't quite feel true to the material, and it certainly didn't really feel beautiful to us. So we threw that one out too. And then we said, well, it's interesting, like we're bodies, we do all these things, but animals do a lot of these things too. Like we go to the grocery store, get our food, well, the squirrel walks around and gets his nuts, right? Like it's kind of similar. Maybe we do this thing where we compare humans to animals. So maybe we have like humans getting groceries and like animals getting groceries. And so we're like, okay, so we set up a whole new Mechanical Turk task to gather 10,000 examples of animals doing all those activities. So here are some animals kissing that we gathered. These are ants, these bunnies kissing, these are all submitted. Some cats kissing, some apes, some dogs kissing, some porpoises kissing, some ducks, I think, elephants kissing. And we were just like, it was just weird. Oh my God. This is not working. Like the horse, the monkeys. And at this point, we had spent like 3 months on this project, and this is where we were. And we're like, this is just not working. Like snakes kissing. Like this felt like we were grasping in the dark and not reaching anything. And so we were going to give up, actually, honestly. And we were really demoralized, and we're just like, maybe this is sunk cost economics. Like, even if you've sunk a lot of cost into something, it's better sometimes to just cut your losses and move on than trying to revitalize it. And we were at that point, and so we met for breakfast in New York at this restaurant that we love called The Smile, where we had first decided to start our collaboration. And we met for breakfast to try to do like a debrief and a postmortem and like what went wrong, why didn't this work, and go our separate ways. And it was a really kind of sad breakfast because we just worked for 3 months and we had nothing to show for it. And during this breakfast, an interesting thing happened, which was that we started talking to each other and we realized we were both experiencing very similar psychological states. We were feeling a lot of anxiety, we were feeling really disconnected from our bodies, even though we had been looking at videos of human bodies for the last 3 months. We felt depressed. We felt like kind of addicted to our screens. We were constantly checking our phones, and we just felt really cut off from the feeling of actually being alive. And we said, we had this moment of insight during this breakfast, and we said, wow, this is really interesting. Like we're both feeling really similar emotional states after this experience, and maybe this is not actually a project about our beautiful common humanity. Maybe this is actually a much darker project about the psychological effect that chronic internet use is having on us, on all of us. And it was kind of like this judo flip where we were like, maybe that's the point. Like the point is that we can't make something beautiful out of this. Like we've spent 3 months trying and we haven't been able to, and maybe that's the honest truth that we need to embrace. And And we decided to go back to the project, but totally change it. And instead of calling it What the Living Do, which was our initial idea, we just said maybe this is called Network Effect. And it's really this like project about human psychology now in the age of internet addiction. I'll show you guys now. I don't know how many of you have seen this. But basically, you come to it and you see this paragraph that says, the internet is said to show our common humanity. Through its data, it's said to provide a kind of omniscience, and through its social networks, a deeper sense of connection. For those without access, it holds the promise of a better life. For those of us who use it a lot, its power to affect our lives is clear. But what is the nature of that effect? How does it change our behavior, the way we see others, the way we see ourselves? And then you click start and you're dropped into this experience here where you have this heartbeat and you have this clock counting down. And you can read here that basically what's happening is it's looking at your IP address, it's finding out the average life expectancy where you live. So in Canada, it's 81.4 years. It translates that into minutes, so 8.14 minutes, 8 minutes and 8 seconds, and that's how long you have to see this, and then it's going to block you for 24 hours. And so you have this mysterious set of words, all these verbs, the 100 verbs, and then you have this mysterious film moving in the background. And you can click any of these, and then you're dropped into an ecosystem.
I don't fight just because I like to. I fight because I'm extremely protective over my friends.
Shaming is a very negative tactic.
It's pretty sad our school is fighting because we're trying to make stuff for... I'm in Durban, and I'm out in
What you're seeing here is the 10,000 videos that we gathered with some distortions applied. The audio that you're hearing, these are tweets that talk about these activities, which are then read aloud by Mechanical Turk workers into their cell phones, and then they email us the resulting recordings, and then we blur all those recordings together to create this multi-layered soundscape that's kind of like a cocktail party where everybody's talking about meditating, or everyone's talking about driving. And kind of creates this like overwhelming cacophony.
That's abused. I know my own body.
When I drive to Singapore out of the country, and I bring the little
I will be exercising a lot less.
People always love it.
Always funny when people wave at.
Towards the bottom of the screen here, you see all of this data. So the design of this was really inspired by like Bloomberg news terminals and airport cable news that you see where they have like a million things on the screen chatting for your attention. So you can see that chewing here is 57% male, so it looks like men chew a little bit more than women. You can see this chewing has been on the rise over the last 100 years. These are news headlines about chewing. These are the number of people that are chewing now, right at this moment. And I'll go into all this data. It's all impeccably collected. This is a definition of chewing. This is how people chew, slowly, thoughtfully, nervously. These are reasons people chew, because they don't have lips, because I might bite down on my tongue ring. These are brands commonly associated with chewing. And you can click on any of these statistics to be dropped into this data layer. This is showing you the gender balance for chewing over the last 100 years. This is based on analyzing Google Books data for neighboring pronouns that commonly accompany the word chew, chewing, chewed, or chews. So if you have a she or a her near chews, you got a female correlation, and likewise for male. So in this way, you can deduce the gender breakdown. You can also see definitions for chewing. These are tweets where people say chewing is blank. Chewing is so much effort. Chewing is on my nerves. Chewing is straight disgusting. Chewing is so goddamn hard. And then you can also see this at different hours of the day. So these are definitions at 9 a.m. Chewing is so unattractive to me. Chewing is honestly so gross. Chewing is exhausting. Or maybe definitions at 8 p.m. Chewing is life-threatening. Chewing is annoying. Chewing is so gross I cry. Blah, blah, blah. You can see the news headlines for chewing. Abilene house fire caused by squirrels chewing wires. Cubs unimpressed by Chicago chewing tobacco ban. You can actually go back in time all the way back to 2004 to look for news headlines on chewing, taken from Google News. You can see the number of people chewing now. This is done through a wisdom of the crowd survey where you ask people to guess how many people they think are chewing right now on Earth, and then you throw away the top 5% and the bottom 5% of guesses, and then you plot the remaining guesses and you take the median. So by that logic, we can deduce that 528 million people are chewing right now. You can see also usage of chewing. Chewing has been on the rise over the last century. in comparison with KISS, which is pretty steady, and then it's been rising since the 1970s. Or planting has been pretty steady. Driving has also been on the rise. You can see the words associated with driving. People drive slowly, around, carefully, faster, rapidly. Big adjectives, nouns, verbs. Brands that people associate with driving: Ford, Toyota, Honda. So basically, this is all just totally absurd. As you can see, it's just like kind of ridiculous. And if you hold down the mouse, you can make these mores go infinitely. The idea here is that you're getting this like exaggerated depiction of how we all consume technology, where there's just total information overload, too much to look at, and you're ultimately left with a feeling of emptiness. Like these data points are all real, and they're all kind of interesting in some way, but they're also really ridiculous, and they don't actually tell you very much about anything of importance, even though they're designed well and everything. So this is how Network Effect ended up, and you can never see all of it. It's hours and hours of footage and endless data points, and you only have around 7 minutes, and then it kicks you out of the experience. And I'll let you view it on your own to see what happens once the time expires. There's a little kind of treat that happens at that point. That's where this project ended up. So it was just interesting for us that it began as this, trying to make this beautiful depiction of humanity, and it ended up in this very different place, ultimately. What I want to show you next, so these were some of the numbers that went into the project. But I kind of want to zoom out a little bit after this project, and just talk about a few bigger points. I think there's this notion that we often have of separating things from other things. Like you can look at a tree or at a bird or a bird's nest and say, oh, that's nature. And you can look at something like a phone and say, that's not nature. That's human. That's something we made. That's technology. But in a way, a bird's nest is also a technology. This is a architectural device that a bird has made to live in, the same way that we have architectural devices that we use to live in. And so in a certain way, these things have a certain equality to them. Humans are part of nature, and we make the phone, and so as an extension of us, these are also, in a way, part of nature. And so sometimes these separations that we make, I don't know if they're so necessary, because in a way, everything that we can conceive of, everything that we experience is part of not just nature, but of our nature. It's how perception works. And this thought that I often have is that you can watch a movie, you can be sitting in a movie theater and you can be watching a movie, and you can get so caught up in the narrative that's happening in the movie, the drama and the conflict and the romance and the suspense, and you take that reality of the movie as being real, and yet at any moment in that movie, you can just, through a slight shift of perception, you can stop seeing it as a narrative and start seeing it as light falling on a flat wall. And in the same way, there's a similar leap of perception that we are capable of in any moment, where on the one hand, you can be so caught up in what's happening, in the narrative of what's happening in your life, the people around you, what time it is, how hungry are you, you gotta go pee, you gotta do this, gotta do that. But through a slight shift of perception, like perceiving the movie as light falling on a wall, there's another way of perceiving reality from moment to moment as simply an experience that's rising and falling in awareness. And in this way, all phenomena that we experience are equidistant. They're the same distance. We think of some things as being far away and other things being closer. And in one sense, in a Cartesian sense, that's true. But in another sense, they're all right there. They're all just rising and falling in our awareness from moment to moment. And one thing that strikes me in, for instance, in this morning's conversations about virtual reality, and these ideas of creating hamster wheels to simulate walking, and maybe you'll have something you wear on your necklace that simulates smells, and maybe you have something you put your hand in that that simulates touch, or maybe eventually we figure out a way to wire it directly into our spinal cord and our brain so that the sense perceptions can be coded in. That the irony that I see in that trajectory is that there seems to be this drive to simulate reality. And yet, we already are in reality. And why is there this drive to simulate reality when we're already in reality? And is there some kind of escapism, some kind of denial of the fact that we're already here? We already have bodies. We have the ultimate VR machines, each of us. We saw it earlier, all those actions. Like, the body is this amazing vehicle that we each are gifted by being alive. And what a gift to have bodies, the ultimate VR machines. And so I wonder if all of this work with VR will ultimately lead us back to life itself. And if that happens, is it worth all of this diversion, ultimately, to get back to the place where we already are? And in realizing that, is there a kind of liberation where suddenly you're liberated back into the world? You're liberated back into your own life, and you realize that your own life is the thing that is the thing you're creating. It's not a project, it is your life. And how does that affect the choices you make and how you choose to live? So, 30, as I mentioned, I started this daily photo practice, and through the process of doing that, I started to become much more attuned to things happening around me, weird synchronicities, things people would say to me, symbols, signs, things like that. And a few things happened in particular. One is I'd left New York and I had moved out to Oregon, and I was living in this cabin for about 4 months by myself out in the woods. And the first night I was there, I was sleeping in this bed up in the loft. And I had just driven across the country, and I was exhausted, and I was so pleased to be there, and I was snuggling up in this warm comforter. And I just turned out the lights, and it was totally silent because it was up at about 4,000 feet of altitude, so there was no insect life or anything like that outside. Very quiet, early September night. And I'd been lying there for a few minutes in the darkness and was just thinking about the next day and drifting off to sleep. And then suddenly, out of the silence, I hear this blood-curdling screaming noise coming from outside. And it was just this horrible, terrifying noise. And I had no idea what it was. I was out there alone in the middle of the forest. And I sat up in bed and I turned on the lights, and it was totally silent again. And then about a minute later, the noise came another time. Same thing. I'm like, well, I'm not going to just sit here and wait for this thing to come get me. So I went downstairs and I got one of the knives out of the kitchen drawer and a flashlight, and I went outside, and it's totally silent again. I was walking around on the pine needle floor of the forest, and it was totally silent, and then the noise came a third time, and it was coming from up in a tree. I said, oh, that's interesting. So I took the flashlight and I shone it up into this huge, tall pine tree, and I couldn't see anything. The light disappeared into the tree because it was so tall. And I was looking up at the tree, and then suddenly, down through the beam of light, fly these two white wings, swooping down at me, and graze my hair, and go up in the tree behind me. I was like, whoa. It was some kind of owl. And then I shone the light to the other tree, and it swooped down through the light a second time and grazed my hair again up into the tree. And I went back inside, comfortable knowing what it was that was making this noise, and went to sleep. And then I was in this place for 4 months, and this became an almost nightly dance that I would do with the owl. It would, not every night, but pretty often I'd go out, hear this screeching, shine the light, it would swoop at me, and then I'd go back and go to bed. And it was kind of this nightly little ritual that we did together. I came to really like it, even though it was a really awful sound. And finally it was time to go. I was going to be moving down to New Mexico. And the night before I left, the neighbor came over, and he knew about this weird thing I had with the owl. The neighbor came over and he told me that he had just found a dead owl lying on the ground of his property. And he brought me over, and we had his flashlight out and got to touch it and feel its talons and its wings and stuff. And we're not sure if it was the same one or not because he lived a few miles away, but it just felt very symbolic. And from that night on, I started encountering owls in all of these strange situations, and I continue to this day. But I started taking owls to be this kind of guardian spirit that I was listening to as I was traveling around the American West for a couple of years. And they became like a wayfinding device for me. And every time I would see one, it would have the effect of saying, like, keep walking this way. Like, this is good, keep walking this way. And I started seeing real owls, owl restaurant, owl bar, people wearing owl t-shirts. I mean, in retrospect, I think it was also merging with a pop culture trend of like owl mania. It's like everywhere. But at the time, I wasn't aware of that, so I just was like, wow, owls everywhere suddenly. Anyway, so I just wanted to give you that as a preamble, and then what I want to do is read you the stories that I wrote for 2 of these days that immediately followed finding that, that dead owl. So both of these took place in a town called Fields, Oregon, which is one of the most remote parts of the US. It's the southeastern part of Oregon, which is a state in the Northwest. And it's kind of a desert area. There's this one little town that's a gas station with a little motel, and I think there's like 5 or 6 houses in the town, and that's it. And then the next town is 100 miles away. And actually, if you guys have heard the news about those American like freedom fighters that were fighting against the government, that was where they were doing this. So it's kind of that tone out there. And it's a town that hunters go to because there's a bird there called chukars that they hunt in the surrounding wilderness. And so the hunters will go to this town, sleep in the motel. And anyway, so I'm going to read you these two days. Everything up above is twisting, winding up tight and preparing to explode. The beef cows know you eat hamburgers, and only the fence prevents their revenge. The hills are brown and blank and scruffy and look like the back of the velveteen rabbit. The bushes cradle the swamp grass, and the swamp grass is lucky to have something to touch. The chukar hunters at dinner talk about their good or bad luck, which means how many chukars they were able to kill. When owls have good or bad luck, it means how many secrets they were able to see. The night is about to get dark, and the only light in town is too high to touch. But that kind of light won't help you to see secrets. So it's the next day. You gonna kill anything today? Says a voice from outside my motel room at dawn. Just a part of myself, I should respond, but I don't know that yet, so I say nothing. The voice belongs to one chukar hunter who is trash-talking another by asking facetious hunting questions like, is he going to kill anything today, when he knows very well they are both going to kill something, and probably many things today, because they are chukar hunters, and they're here to hunt and kill chukars. Sometimes life will give you signs, and it's good if you can see them, because they can show you the way and prepare you for what is to come. The most important signs are usually not labeled, so they are like secret signs. They occur in the physical world, but they map your inner landscape, and they are made just for you. Since they are secrets, you cannot read them directly. Instead, you have to use feeling and intuition to uncover their meaning. The man at the motel asks me where I'm going, and I say south. He says that first I should go north to see the playa, and I say that maybe I will. He says that, really, I should see the playa before leaving, and he smirks at me like there's something waiting for me there. I ask if I can take his picture, but he says no, and then I remember you can't take pictures of prophets. So I drive 20 miles north on a dirt road to the playa, which is vast and desiccated and totally deserted, with flat, cracked earth stretching on for miles. I see a blank sign, and I take the road it marks, which leads to the shore of the dried-up lake. I walk out onto the playa and feel the earth. In my fingers, it crumbles like feta cheese. Under my feet, it is soft like a yoga mat. After a while, I come to a piece of wood that points to the other side and seems to say, this is the way. Soon, I see a small white box sitting in the dirt. As I get closer, I see it as a toilet, which is a very strange thing to find in the middle of a playa. Stuffed into the toilet and staring up at me is a coyote carcass, grimacing and terrible. Nearby, a piece of wood is separated from its shadow, which seems to say that something is about to change. I go to get my car and I drive onto the playa in a trance, speeding and swerving and covering my eyes just for the hell of it. I stop precisely at the center and get out. There's a huge and perfect circle drawn in the dirt. I walk into it and my whole body starts to tingle, like some kind of invisible energy is rushing through me. I spin around several times and try to understand what it is. I think how the coyote toilet was the death of something shitty in me, something I no longer need that was brought into the open and conquered in solitude. I think of the playa as like my whole life, and that this circle is the halfway point. Into the circle run tire tracks in various formations. Behind me, the tracks run in perfect parallel pairs. Ahead of me, the tracks cross and change places, and I wonder what this means. There are no tracks inside the circle. Behind me are the mountains, covered in snow and foreboding. Ahead of me is a low mesa, lit pink by the sun. Behind me is the past, the mountains like ancestors. Ahead of me is the rest of my life, with death on the other side of the mesa. I think about driving to the mesa, but I don't do that, because before you can know your future, you first have to live it, and for now it's enough to understand the landscape. So I sit in the dirt, and I think for a while, and I write a little bit, and when I get up, I give the playa some water to help with the dryness. On my way back, I see the red skull of something that died, and I think about other things that have died. I drive south, across the beautiful, desolate wasteland of southeastern Oregon, and I hardly see another car. I drive dirt roads through canyons, up and down buttes, over mountains, and across wide open plains. I'm hunting down Willow Creek Hot Springs, which the motel prophet said I should visit. I get lost many times because there are no signs, and I venture 10 miles through sagebrush up onto the wrong mountain, only to turn back once I reach the summit, which is cold and gorgeous, with raptors gliding past me. I find the hot springs at last, and I get out of the car. There's one other car, a 1975 Chevy truck with a canvas tent pitched next to it, a barbecue smoking on the ground, and hip-hop music blasting. I wave politely to the man, who's big and gruff and dirty. Slowly, he approaches me. He is scruffy, unshaven, holding a beer, wearing holographic skull sunglasses and a camouflage hat, and has a pistol holster strapped to his chest with an extra clip on the side. We are alone in a vast valley with nothing around for many miles, and I'm scared. "Vermont, eh?" he says, looking at my plates. "Yeah, sorry about that." "You shoot guns?" "I never shot a pistol. Shot a rifle a few times." "You want to now?" My heart is beating fast, and I'm very nervous, and I try to think what would be the best way to handle this. I say, "Sure." He chugs the rest of his beer, paces out 10 steps, puts the can on the ground, walks back, and hands me the gun. "Just cock it and shoot." "Is there a big kick?" "Not like a .357. So I aim at the can, and I pull the trigger, and the can goes skipping along the ground, and my ears are ringing very loud, and I just fired a pistol. "Damn, you sure you ain't never shot a pistol before?" "No, never. I guess I'm just lucky." I think he's impressed, and he lets me take his picture, so I feel a bit safer taking off my clothes and bathing in the hot spring, which now feels especially baptismal. Spindly green algae dance through the water and onto my skin, and the bullet casing sits next to me on a rock lit bright by the sun. The man drives off for more gas, leaving me all alone. I keep on south into Nevada, passing cows, casinos, and a Christmas light cross, which collectively satisfy just about any vice. It's late, and I haven't eaten since breakfast, so I'm tired and hungry, and I pull into the town of Battle Mountain, Nevada. As I drive slowly down the main drag and look at the only hotel and restaurant in town, I rub my eyes a few times in disbelief, but each time I see the same thing. So then I know where it is I will be eating dinner, and where it is I will be sleeping tonight. Thanks. So through all of this, this is one thing I've come to believe. Tools matter less, and the inner life of the person using the tools matters more. It's really easy to get caught up just learning new tools all the time, especially when you work in technology. There's always some new thing to be learning. As someone was saying this morning, it's like every day reading the tech blogs, there's some new thing you need to be up on, and you're never going to win at that. It's a losing battle. There's always someone younger with more energy, with more money, with more time, whatever. And at some point, I think you really have to say, like, I know what I know, and that's sufficient to start making something. And sometimes I compare it to learning a language. Like, you know, you can learn French, and then you can learn Portuguese, and then you can learn Mandarin, and then you can learn Spanish. But at some point, you have to decide what you're going to use that language to say. So I think it is really important to master a craft of some kind, but once you've done that, I think you have to move beyond that phase of learning languages and move into the phase of using the languages to speak. No worries. So I would just say that, like, just a note of caution when it's so easy to get caught up in like constantly learning the new thing, chasing the new thing. Like, ask yourself, what am I really trying to say? What is in me that I want to communicate? And then the final sentiment I just want to leave you with is just to say how important attention is. I think we're living through this interesting time now where human attention is being mined as a really precious natural resource, and huge fortunes are being made off of mining that resource. It's a lot like how the early robber barons made their fortunes in the late 1900s by realizing the value of some natural resources before everybody else realized that value. Sugar, rubber, oil, timber. Huge fortunes were made out of monopolizing those resources and gathering them all before everyone else realized how precious they were, and then selling those resources back to everybody at a huge profit. That's how all the great fortunes were made. The same thing now is happening with human attention. We're all custodians of our own attention. We all are equal in human attention, regardless of our inequality in money, in resources, in power, and fame, whatever. We all have the same amount of time in our days. And that time is our most valuable thing because it is the same as our life. What you choose to hold in your attention, what appears in your awareness, that is your life. Your awareness is your life. And so just being mindful of how you're deciding to dispense that and how you're deciding to direct that is this great power that each of us holds. It's very radical when you realize that we're each guardians of that, and we don't have to give it away. We can choose to give it away, but we don't have to. So I would just urge you to learn to be mindful of your attention and how you're choosing to deploy it, and to realize that it is the same as your life. And with that, I will wave goodbye, and thank you guys for listening.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was really an incredible talk. You've just taken us on this extraordinary journey through your life and art, which seems to be very difficult to separate the two. And I think that's been a kind of ongoing reflection on your part, is thinking of the distinctions between life and performance. And thank you for reminding us about what's really important. I think, it's almost a kind of a spiritual aspect to your work and your reflections on your work, to remind us, to bring us back to our bodies and bring us back to what's really important. So thank you so much for that. That was really beautiful. Well, let me just start out with one question, because of course this is, we're talking about new practices, technologies of documentary, and you took us through the network effect, which had been conceptualized. And I think, like all of your work in many ways, I love this phrase about data poetics and the poetics of thinking about how to use information. But really, all of your work is in some ways a quest to understand humanity, which is, it seems so banal, but it's so rich in terms of how you're actually articulating this and manifesting it. And while you started out trying to do something that was, again, like so much of your work was going to be a reflection on, well, what is it to be human at this point in time? What keeps us together? What keeps us apart? How does technology interface with the way that we're relating to ourselves and our corporal beings and our physical beings? But you take this turn somewhere else, and so it becomes about addiction. And I'm just wondering where you go from there. I have a friend who's actually working on this project, which kind of totally shocked me. And she's done stuff, kind of reflections on our digital selves. And she wants to invent an app that will remind us that we're getting addicted. And I said, oh, that's really interesting that we need something digital to remind us of our pre-digital selves. But after the network effect, then, when we're confronted with our addictions, where do we go beyond? Or do we just turn it off?
Yeah, that's a great question. I laughed when I saw a tweet when Network Effect launched from somebody who said, this project could also have been called We Used to Feel Fine and Now We Feel Terrible. But I think you're right. I think, where do we go from there? I think for me, I keep coming back to life. Like, that's the place that I keep coming back to whenever I hit a wall. It happened after that MoMA project when I talked about kind of going through a kind of depressed phase and not really wanting to sit behind screens anymore. And it was kind of going out into life and going down to Texas and Mexico and sleeping out in the desert and just feeling excited to be alive again. I think after Network Effect, I just made a big move. I moved from Brooklyn up to my childhood home in Vermont. And so I'm living in nature now next to a river. And I think the kinds of work I'm interested in doing now are much harder to separate from life. I'm interested in restoring our family home and making a space where other people can come and experience the healing qualities of that land. I'm also interested in ritual and prayer and actions performed with extreme intention as a way of transforming the psychic energy of a place and a way of unhooking from historical patterns that can repeat themselves. So there's this kind of like shamanic quality to it. And so that's a very different direction than any of the digital projects, but that's a place that I've noticed myself ending up after doing Network Effect. Almost feeling like the internet was tapped out. Like after that project, just feeling like, well, maybe enough has been said about that for now, and maybe the new frontier is just like life itself. But that's still very new. I just moved a couple weeks ago, and we'll see how it all unfolds from here.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard to think of the internet as being so 2016, but I'm wondering, though, that within the internet and living online is now part of our real as well. We're all a part of it, whether we want to or not. Is there a way, because of just some of the other projects that we were looking at today that are about storytelling, that are the deep humanity of the Syrian project that Ralph was showing us, that is there a way to, in some ways for you, to reanimate the internet so we have a sense of spirituality or connection, or is there a way to import ritual and other aspects into it?
I think those questions feel very alive for me right now. Actually, over the last 6 months, I've been reading a lot of the early journals of Bill Viola, the video artist, who, it's interesting. So, I don't know how many of you guys know Bill Viola. He's kind of this mega famous video artist who's known for making almost religious kind of work. Like he does a lot of installations in European churches and Venice and stuff. But in his early days, a lot of the work he was making was very meta. Like a lot of the early video art was very meta. It was kind of work about the medium of video art. It was kind of inside baseball a little bit. I think a lot of the early internet work also has that quality. Like it's especially interesting to practitioners of the medium, maybe more so than to a mainstream audience. And it was actually the death of his mother that changed things for him. His mom died. He was in the hospital with her, and he said, I am an artist, and if I can't make art about this experience, what kind of artist am I? And after his mom died, his work took this really decisive turn towards a kind of spiritual direction. And that's the path that he's really been on ever since. And so in reading those early journals of his, which were from the 70s, and which were about video, I couldn't help but think about where the internet is now and whether there's a similar shift that can happen within the practitioners of internet art or interactive art in general towards this kind of deeper dimension than a lot of the work that we've all been producing up until now. And I don't know exactly what that looks like. I don't know that I've seen examples of it. I don't think anyone really knows what it looks like, so it's a very strong question, and I think it would be tremendous if we could make that shift. And I think it has a lot to do with the inner life of each of us as practitioners, more so than some kind of list of steps that you can follow that somebody else can write down for you. I think it's it really, in this strange alchemical way, it becomes about repatterning your own life, and then you start to have new perceptions about what can be made, and that feels like that's the path to it, rather than some kind of manifesto or something that someone else can consume. But I don't know, these are just musings for now.
I'm sure you must have some questions. Does anybody want to start out questioning? Yeah. Thanks.
Were you ever able to find out any statistical information about who the Mechanical Turk workers were that were like harvesting information?
Yep, we did. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I remember that there was around. I don't think it was on that side. Yeah, they came from all over the world. I think it was mainly the U.S., India, and Australia, and I think there were maybe a few hundred of them that we ended up paying, but not more than that.
Neat.
We liked them being kind of anonymous, and it was almost like asking the oracle of the internet to do these tasks for us. Yeah.
Cool.
I just want to ask, is everyone comfortable not using this mic? Because it's giving us that snappy feedback.
Yeah.
So just speak loudly when you have questions. Okay, thank you.
I mean, it's such a bizarre concept, this kind of imaginary proletariat who are out there living on the web in disembodied kind of ways.
Yeah.
Are they doing other work as well, or is this?
Yeah, they're.
Because it said one of the tags, it was Amazon
Yep.
Mechanical Turk. So is Amazon?
Yeah,
That running
so-
Amazon when I wrote a report?
So for those of you who don't know, so Amazon developed this system about a decade ago, I think, because they actually developed it for image classification. They needed like all of these rote tasks performed that were very difficult to do through computers, but would be very easy to do by humans. And they didn't want to actually hire all these people as employees, so they just built a way where anonymous people could sign on anywhere in the world, accept a task, submit the result of the task, and then get paid like 2 cents. And they opened up that service so that other people could also use it, so it wasn't just for Amazon. And so now I think there's a workforce of something like 400,000 people around the world that are using this. But I mean, you could sign up and become a worker too. Any of us can be Amazon Mechanical Turk workers. So it's kind of this old service. They actually haven't updated it much. Like the web pages for it are very out of date and not in the normal Amazon UI. But it still works well. And you can set your own price, and it's like an auction thing, so people can decide if they want to accept your task or not. And then when they submit the results, you can either accept or reject the results if they were submitted correctly or not. But it's just this, it's a weirdly like disembodied, depersonalized way of accomplishing your task. Like the taxi driver I had coming over here this morning, he was, when we were talking about guavas, which ended up not actually being the name of this place, but he was saying, we were talking about how tomatoes are so tasteless now, not in the sense of being tacky, but in the sense of not having much flavor. And he was saying that he's from Ethiopia, and in Ethiopia the tomatoes are just like so delicious because there's not this idea of producing food in order to sell it in a market. Like food is produced for the people producing the food and their families to eat the food, and so it's all delicious and amazing. And when he was saying like in the U.S. We're so cut off from our food source, and accordingly like the flavor is really bad. And I feel like Amazon Mechanical Turk is like the U.S. food system version of task completion, but very very similar to the internet in that way. In that it kind of like, even as it connects people, it also disconnects us.
Just in regard to the Amazon Mechanical Turks, can you do it so you can be specific, like I only want people from Australia to submit?
I think you can, I think you can do that. But Amazon is pretty cagey about not allowing the workers to reveal their identities. So there's all sorts of limitations, like you can't ask them certain questions. Like you can't have the task be, tell us your address. I think that's not allowed. But I think you can specify by country. Yeah. Do you have a task you need some Australians to do for you? What's that?
It's my PhD project that I'm working on.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I just need a whole bunch of people to shoot some stuff.
Yeah, you should look into that.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how you came up with the different verbs that you were using as ways to categorize human experience?
Yeah, so I mean, it was subjective and arbitrary, but the criteria used was that we wanted the verbs to be timeless. So the one exception was drive, which is a car thing, but all the other ones they don't depend on technology. They're actions that anybody would do anywhere. Whenever possible, we wanted them to be not limited to humans, so other species could also do these. And we wanted them to be bodily, in the sense of having a bodily gesture associated with them, rather than like think or like listen. Yeah, you need something that's that like has bodily evidence. And then just simple, like short, simple, one syllable when possible. Just kind of the basic things that a body does. That was the idea. Yeah.
And is it, when you're giving the instructions on the kind of video you want, do you say global, or do you say I want more, we don't have enough representation from
Well, that was
Africa?
right. That was a huge problem. Like we found there just wasn't coverage on YouTube. Like the YouTube version of humanity is not really a depiction of humanity. It's like a depiction of a very narrow sliver of humanity, and that was one of the ways in which we found it hard to create this like beautiful global portrait of humanity. It just didn't feel diverse. It didn't feel truly representative of the world. But we did give example videos for each activity, so people would know what we meant by the word. And we asked people not to submit animations, celebrities, music videos, or ads, or vertical videos. So we had a few restrictions like that. Yes.
I have a question.
Allison, go ahead.
Sorry, I first came to your work through a data visualization book that covered We Feel Fine. And I, at the time, was fascinated by the cleanliness and the kind of the graphic abstraction of data visualization. But obviously, when you come from having done those handmade books, that's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm just wondering if you could talk about that in your work.
Yeah, I mean, so I definitely have a really strong impulse towards order. I'm a Virgo, and my mom's family has a history of extremely obsessive behavior. My great-grandmother founded a museum in Vermont, which is called the Shelburne Museum, and it has, it's like an obsessive collection of American folk art. Like there's a whole building of anvils. And they're like impeccably classified by shape and design and country of origin, and another whole building of teacups and another one of quilts. And I mean, she was crazy, but she managed to produce this like kind of amazing museum. In the case of my mom, like she also has this obsessive quality, but she wasn't able to channel it in a productive way. So for her, it kind of like devoured her life. So I think this like classifying, sorting, organizing impulse is really strong in my family, and I've tried to channel it when possible into projects like We Feel Fine. But you're right, yeah, the sketchbooks had a very different feeling to them. I don't know, I guess I had different sides to my personality, maybe. Maybe the sketchbooks like represent the person I want to be, and the We Feel Fine is like indulging my obsessive impulses, I'm not sure.
I'm just curious because the sort of feel of data visualization has a resonance with some of what you're looking at in network effect.
Yeah.
There's something abstracted about it.
Yeah.
Rather than the human like lived experience.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true. I mean, I don't know. To me, that's how I think of data. Like I think of data as very clean and precise, and I know people have done data visualization projects with very tactile materials, but that's never felt right to me. Like for me, I always prefer the like really crisp. Like if you're going to do this thing, then do it totally, kind of thing. But that doesn't apply so much to work in the physical world. Like I think if I was to do I don't know, a painting project, I don't think it would involve lots of straight lines, for instance.
The balloons, now that I think about it, that was like the one exception.
Yeah.
Balloons pretend.
Yeah, that was a little messier, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a question back there.
Yeah.
Hi, John. Thank you very much for a great presentation. My name is Khalid, and I am doing my PhD in adult education at University of Toronto. So I think what you've shared with us has a tremendous implication on adult education, how to empower adults, especially marginalized learners like immigrants, that they have lots of capital, lots of resources, their attention.
Yeah.
So my question is that, because I like to comment that human body is like a virtual reality device, and that the future of our resources and value is in our attention.
Mm-hmm.
So from your experience, can you elaborate or share your reflection on the relationship between language and the material world? How language can allow us with this virtualization of the world and the body and the cognition to shape the material world around us?
Well, that's a very deep question, actually. I mean, there's some research that suggests that it's actually language itself that creates our reality, and that an infant coming out of the womb in the first few weeks of life, not having language, perceives a kind of psychedelic oneness, where there's just color and sensation, but it's not. Nothing is separate. There's no division between this microphone and the air right here. It's just. And for any of you guys who have taken psychedelics, like that's kind of what you end up experiencing. And so there's good reason to believe that that's actually what's going on. I think language does play a huge role in making our reality seem what it is to us. Like, because we have a name for this, it looks separate. And because we don't have a name for this, it's nothing. But actually, if we could have a name for this, that would be something. And then it would be perceived as something, and eventually, when that pattern gets established in the brain, that something would solidify into something very material. But there's a lot of things we don't have names for, and therefore we think they don't exist. And yet, these things may affect us anyway. I mean, for instance, moods that come over us, or synchronicities that happen, or the way a certain feeling comes over you when you see how sunlight falls on a wall. We may not have names for these things, but they're still felt experiences, and they have a kind of reality. And so, yeah, I think what we choose to name becomes what is real to us. So language is an incredibly powerful technology in that respect. What I don't know is whether different languages experience different realities. That would be an interesting area of research. I think a lot has been said about the prototypical Eskimos having their 40 words for snow or whatever, but that would be a really interesting set of questions, is the experience of reality different for people in different languages?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.